Hello, Bruce Wayne again with one of my adventure stories. So while I was in Rock Hall, I really learned how to cook, not perfectly, but reasonably decent in order to survive there. And there are a few foods that I ate that were quite dangerous to prepare. So I wanted to just give you a sense of some of the dangers that were involved in basic day-to-day activities. Now, 3 foods that I actually learned how to prepare. Let me just read directly the science behind it. So number 1 is ackee. The ackee is the national fruit in Jamaica. But one of the things about preparing ackee is that if you do it incorrectly, actually it can be quite dangerous. They typically cook ackee with salted codfish, and it's quite a delicious dish. But preparing it wrong can have detrimental consequences. So let me read to you some of the dangers of preparing an ackee incorrectly so you can understand some of the danger to an 8-year-old boy. So ingesting unripe ackee fruit may result in metabolic syndrome known as Jamaican vomiting sickness. Clinical manifestation may include profuse vomiting, altered mental status, and hypoglycemia. Severe cases have been reported to cause seizure, hypothermia, which means your temperature-related issues, coma, and death. Medical treatment is primarily supportive care with intravenous fluid and dextrose. So let me read that last line. Medical treatment primarily is supportive. So in other words, typically, they really don't have a solution for ackee because of the dangers of it. So, doing it wrong can create some serious problems, including you dying, and especially an 8-year-old boy, I'm sure eating ackee and doing it wrong, I could have actually been dead, been killed. Another fruit or spice that we used a lot there was nutmeg. And typically what happens is that you'd have some tea and then you sprinkle a little bit of nutmeg on there, and that's how you do it. And but according to the research by the International Program on Chemical Safety, nutmeg intoxication resembles intoxication with profuse sweating, flushed face, delirium, dry throat, etc. There's always an altered state of mind, such as hallucinations, confusion, and impending state sense of doom. The study also explained how much is considered toxic, saying that 1 to 3 nutmeg, or 5 to 15 grams, which is basically 1 to 3 teaspoons, is reported to be a toxic dosage. This intoxication usually passes within 24 hours. However, in some cases, psychosis may set in. And the psychosis can last up to actually 6 months. So what is psychosis? Psychosis is basically being detached from reality. So imagine being completely out of your mind for 6 months. I mean, that's just scary thought. And the only reported death that they said, based on the study, is that it was that of an 8-year-old boy. Well, guess what? I was 8 years old, so maybe just the dosage was a lot for such a small body. So that was another case of foods that I actually had to prepare. And the third one is cassava. Now, cassava, typically known to South Americans as yuca, we used to use that a lot in Jamaica. It's basically, you dig it out of the ground as kind of a root, and then you would cook it, and then typically after you cook it, you'd mush it out in a cloth and you'd wring it out. And the water from that came out of it, it was very, very starchy. And so you could use the water to make starch that you use to starch your actual clothes. And then the actual leftover, that floury part of it, you could use that to make what is called bami. And bami is basically sort of like a bread, but just tastes a hell of a lot better. But preparing cassava incorrectly actually is very dangerous, and I'll read exactly what it says. It says, cassava may contain cyanide and must be processed before consumption. Even soaking the product for a few hours will make a difference. Otherwise, unprocessed bitter cassava can kill you if it's consumed in insufficient quantities. And so those are 3 of the actual foods that I actually had to prepare. So being in Rock Hall by myself, and a lot of times I really was by myself, because even though I had all my siblings around me, you know, typically I don't quite remember where they were, whether they went to continue to attend school or not. I just remember that there are many times that I'd wake up and everybody would be gone and I'd be alone by myself. And I think in the beginning it was an expectation that you know, I'd go to school as well. So everybody was gone and I was there. And when I stopped going to school, I had lots of time on my hand. And so if I needed to cook some food, well, then I had to do it myself. And so I had to be very careful, listen to everyone around, give an instruction to make sure that I was doing things very carefully. One of the other things that was very interesting at the time was just how organic everything was. If you were making tea, you'd simply put a pot of water on the stove, and then you just go down the gully. We call, I'm not saying the gully, but we also call the area that we live the gully right there. And you just reach over a few feet over, and you could get some mint and throw it in the pot. Or you can get some orange leaf and you can throw it in the pot. And we have different kind of mints there as well. And you could, you know, there were coffee plants there, which we didn't drink coffee, but there was just lots of different variety of things you can use to make teas there. And so, you know, when people talk about organic, everything was organic there. It was just the way nature made it. And I remember my first experience doing business. And after a while, you know, some of even though we had an abundance of fruits and vegetables that was there close by, sometimes, you know, that certain things were running out of, and so we had to go down to Sandy Gully. But as far as being able to generate money to get other things like, you know, protein in particular, chicken or flour, even though you can have bananas and yam that you dug out of the ground, sometimes you wanted some flour. And so in order to get flour, which is not something we could process on our own, I started a vegetable garden on a little spot on the property. You know, it took me a while to sort of grow them, of course, and I did quite well with them. And so I took those vegetables down to the local grocery store and actually convinced them to purchase them from me. And over time, I kept on with more and more turnips. In fact, was the primary product that I had, and they purchased the turnips from me. And then when I didn't ask for money, what I asked for is a trade. And so I trade for either flour, a half a pound of flour, or a half a pound of chicken back. Because remember, back then we didn't have chicken breasts. Chicken breast is what you ate when I was living with my parents in the city. But when you lived in Jamaica and you lived in the country and you have nothing, then chicken back is what you're gonna go with, and chicken gizzard, etc. And so basically that's what I did, and I did that for quite a period of time until one day I came to my little farm, quiet little secret farm, and I noticed all my turnips were plucked out of there, and there's nothing left there. And it turns out that my Aunt Dawn, the one that my brother fought with all the time, she discovered my little farm there, and she basically, you know, poached it and took all my stuff out of there. And so it was discouraging to me that you know, somebody was doing that. And so because of that, I think I lost interest after a while. But it certainly gave me a sense of confidence to know that I could actually, with a delayed gratification, by the way, to be able to have an idea, to be able to implement that idea, and then to have that idea literally come to fruition, and being able to take that product and bring it down to a customer and be able to have a business exchange. And so at a very early age, that was my first interaction doing with business, and it gave me a sense of confidence that carried over. Because one of the things in the Jamaican culture that is, and in the Caribbean culture that is known, is that people, I learned that there are no limitations in what you can do. And when I lived in Rock Hall, having essentially a lawless environment where we can try and test a lot of things. It was a great testing ground for us to be able to try different ideas without having a naysayer or a Debbie Downer, somebody telling you it cannot be done, oh, you shouldn't try that. And so that carried over where I believe that I can do anything that I want to do as long as I put in the time, put in the work, and put in the effort. And I think that translates over time, and it followed me throughout my life. Now, one of the other experience that I had was I remember, that they killed this one pig, I think, that was there, and it was very interesting at the time that I remember that story, and they actually used every part of it. Nothing was wasted, not even the blood was wasted. I know you're grossed out by it, but the point is that sometimes when I see and I watch people and they go hunting here in the US and they're more like killing the animal, but they're not really using the parts, I always think, well, back home in Jamaica, we would use every single part of that actual animal and nothing would be wasted. A couple other odd sidebar things about the culture also is that you would never have a pet in the house. Like, dogs were always outside because they have lots of lands and place to roam outside, but the dog was never allowed in the house. So when we came to the United States, it was so strange to see dogs in the house, but I understand based on the weather that you certainly couldn't have your dog outside unless you're gonna create an environment or space where it was heated or air conditioned so that the dog could survive. The other thing that we didn't do as well, I think a lot of Jamaicans were germaphobes, so they'd take their shoe off at the front door and they'd never bring their shoe in. It's shoes inside the house. And I also remember that people, even though they didn't have much, remember, if you think about the logistics of it, there are 5 of us at the very beginning that stayed at my grandfather's house. Now the house, remember, is 2 rooms, 2 bedrooms. There's no additional rooms. There's just 2 rooms. And so 5 of us slept in one room. My grandfather slept in the other room, plus Dawn and plus Tat. So there's 5 and 3, there's 8 people staying in 2 bedrooms at the time, just because of the amount all of us sort of showing up on his doorstep, so to speak. But somehow we managed to survive under those conditions, and it didn't really feel, you didn't feel like you're losing anything that way. And today when I look back, I think some of the stories and message and things that I learned is that you can survive with less sometimes in order to achieve an outcome. And I think being in Jamaica and going through that time, I think it taught me that no matter what happened, I can survive. I can find a way to make something happen. But on a funnier side of thing, my wife would say, hey, do you want to go camping? And my family and I would go, why? And she's like, well, it's fun. And I go, but I said, I kind of lived that life. I did the wood fire thing. I didn't have it. There's no heat there. I mean, or air conditioned there. You were living out, sort of not completely outside, but in a very tough environment and having to fend for everything. So to sort of go out there and to just, deliberately go out in that environment and try to camp, so to speak, is not something that was very interesting to me. When I got here, and it still really isn't. I don't think I've ever camped other than like in high school here in the US, where we went to camp and it was in a big facility where you had bathrooms and everything where it was there.